In 1986, it was then called Quantum Computer Services, soon to become AOL, or I guess it changed that year. They started to send disks out to all of us to join a service called America Online. And although in the last 4 to 5 years there's been an unbelievably huge spate of press coverage on folks like Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and some of the other new arrivals on this technology platform we call the internet that have gotten us all to join together in social networks and other arenas like that, both in the personal and professional vein. But just think back to the 80s and the early 90s. And just remember that, in fact, it was America Online, specifically America Online, not their competitors, CompuServe, Prodigy, Genie, and all the others. America Online specifically, through its ease of use and its ubiquitous marketing efforts to bring the consumer online. And without those efforts, I would argue that none of this would be going on today. So building on the government investment in the internet, but adding that ease of use and access that the America Online product and its ubiquitous marketing, both domestically and internationally, created, that actually is what changed the world. So we certainly celebrate the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Meg Whitmans and the other executives that are adding those features and services on top of this platform. But at the end of the day, the company, and in many ways the person that changed our world so much, is our guest this morning. And with that, please welcome Steve Case, our speaker.
A very kind introduction from Mark. I remember when I guess it was 1986, when he was going to go to work for a competitor, actually a division of GE called Genie.
Correct.
I said, "What? We're gonna make sure you have a tough time, and then
Correct.
you're gonna have to join us." And a couple of years later, he did. So he just shows you that his initial instinct wasn't perfect, but eventually, got the joke. And the introduction about Mark Zuckerberg's kind of funny. The first time I met him was 4 or 5 years ago now, maybe longer. Two things I remember. One is I was looking at him and realized he wasn't even born when I got started in this industry. That made me feel a little bit old. But the second was, he said that he learned how to program by hacking into the AOL system. And apparently he was pretty good at it. He was explaining some of the things he was doing with a particular instant messenger thing. So I said, well, I'm grateful that we were able to help provide. I think he was grateful I was there, so almost like he could get off his chest. I think he's feeling a little guilty about spending years trying to bring us down. Anyway, it's great to be here.
So we'll talk about other features of FedBid and marketplaces in general, but update our audience on what's happened with you since AOL Revolution. What was the genesis for starting Revolution, and what are the features of the Revolution family of products and services and companies that you've been most proud of and most excited about?
Well, I'm most proud of FedBid.
Yay! That was a tease.
I basically spent about 20 years trying to make the internet part of everyday life. As Mark was saying at the beginning, we got started, only 3% of people were online. They're online about an hour a week. And we said someday everybody will be online. They'll be online all the time to multiple devices. And most people thought we were crazy, but we eventually, it took us like a decade, but eventually we broke through it. I really enjoyed that journey, that idea, big idea, change the world idea, take a kind of a long-term view, have the kind of the passion and perseverance to see it through. But then stepped down as CEO about, I think it's 12 years ago, and said, rather than start something else myself, I'm still in my late 30s, seems a little early to just be kind of sitting on a beach somewhere. Why don't I invest in entrepreneurs with great ideas, so the next kind of AOLs, if you will, the next Steve Case, if you will, and mentor them, just try to help bring some of these businesses to scale. So that's what I've done for most of the last decade. We've invested in a couple dozen companies, some earlier stage businesses, some kind of later stage businesses. But what unifies all of them is that they're big ideas. They are kind of disruptive, change the world ideas. And we think we can build big companies on it, but also improve people's lives, or improve, improve the way things happen and make things more efficient, more effective. So that's been fun. It's ran the gamut from some things still that are internet related. One company is based in DC, Living Social, has grown rapidly in the local commerce space. When we first invested, there was basically 4 people. Now they have over 4,000 people, 4 years later. So that's a great example of kind of really hitting it with an interesting concept. Another one we invested in probably 7 or 8 years ago now, the Zipcar, car sharing business. The idea that cities like DC it's actually crazy for most people who own cars. It's better to have them available when you need them because they're conveniently parked and you can use a smartphone to book them and so forth. So those kind of things. More recently, we mentioned invested in an education company trying to help higher ed move into the digital future. We're working with 600 universities called Echo 360. And then frankly, what FedBid was one of the ones that was quite exciting because when I first heard about it, first of all, it was like, well, this is such an obvious idea. Like, why didn't this happen before? It's one of those kind of insights. And but it's hard to build up one of these marketplaces where you really have kind of the buyers and sellers together. And the idea in a world where you can, I think exactly what happens with the fiscal cliff, exactly what happens with this whole deficit discussion. It's hard, it's a little early to tell. But one thing's for sure, governments, and certainly this country, but even around the world, are going to have to be more efficient in procurement. They just are. And so having an approach that allows you to do that in a more systematic way, we thought was, again, an idea that was great for the nation, help government save money, also could build a significant company on that idea. So those are the kind of things we look to invest in, not just, we characterize them as sort of significant, iconic, built-to-last companies, not just sort of more of a short-term, built-to-flip kind of orientation.
So you mentioned, we'll get back to the fiscal cliff. I think it's a fascinating topic for us to focus on this morning with this audience, but you've commented publicly a lot about the sharing economy. What are some themes? You mentioned Zipcar as one example of that. What are some ways you see that playing out, both in your the corporate investments or other arenas that you're monitoring?
So this started emerging about 10 years ago, but it's really picked up steam in the last 2 or 3 years ago. The basic idea is there's both a generational shift, kind of away from ownership to use and experience, and some new technology, particularly the internet, that have made sharing things convenient and more efficient than it had been before. I mean, I mentioned Zipcar. A concept like Zipcar is not possible without a ubiquitous mobile internet. The reason it works is you can park, we have about 10,000 cars now, and you park them in different parts. I'm sure there's some block or two away, and you can get out your smartphone and find that car and book it for an hour and walk up to it and open the car and drive away and so forth. It's enabled by the internet. So essentially sharing a car instead of owning a car. Cars cost like $1,000 a month and are used on average less than an hour a day. So they're sitting idle 23 hours a day. Why not share them? And we've seen that now cut across other businesses. One of the fast-growing internet businesses, Airbnb, is essentially doing that, sharing space. If you have an extra room in your house, or you want to rent out sort of an apartment or something, you can use a resource like this. And it's this whole idea of a sharing economy. It's powered partly by some, I think, generational almost lifestyle changes in terms of how people think about things, but also by being enabled by these new technology platforms.
Do you share one of your bedrooms with Airbnb in your local home? Is that
Only for you, Mark.
So when you and your colleagues at Revolution Growth look for growth companies, what are some themes that you see in entrepreneurs or management teams that have been consistent, that sort of represent potential success? Or are there some positive things you look for and some negative signs about entrepreneurs and their teams that you tend to focus on?
A little bit back to what I was saying before I was built to last. I mean, there really are, I think, 3 kinds of entrepreneurs, and they're all important, but there's one in particular we're more focused on. One are essentially small business entrepreneurs. They basically have an idea for something. Maybe they want to open a restaurant or something like that, and it really is a small business, and it's likely to continue to be a small business. That is really their focus, and there are a lot of people doing that, and actually a key part of the economy, a source of a lot of jobs. But it really is a classic kind of a small business. The second are entrepreneurs that really are building something, usually a product that they think would be accepted by the market, with the intention of selling it to somebody else. They really aren't intending to build a company they're going to be involved in for like 10, 20, 30 years. It really is, I'm going to create this, and this is particularly true in the internet space, but it's true in other places. I'm going to create this app, and it's going to, like, 2 million people are going to download it, and then I'm going to get, I don't know, Facebook or somebody to buy it. And this is the strategy, is to essentially build to flip. And it's really, for a lot of products have been successful. Instagram, a photo sharing app, sold to Facebook for nearly $1 billion. It was 12 people. That actually was great for the people, great for for the investors, great for Facebook, great for the people using Instagram. There's nothing wrong about it, but it was really intended to be it was this kind of a product play. The third is where we're a little more focused, which are these built to last companies that really are, it seems kind of, I shouldn't say it, people go, well, that's kind of cute, but we really want to change the world. We really have big ideas and want to transform things, want to disrupt things, believe there is a better way, like we did 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I guess now, with trying to create the internet and AOL, that really are onto something and are willing to take a long-term view and recognize that revolutions rarely happen overnight. It sometimes takes 10 or 20 years to really have the kind of impact you want to have. And some of the areas in particular we like to focus on are like healthcare, which is 1/6 of our economy, and it doesn't work very well. And everybody kind of agrees on that, but they doesn't necessarily agree on the solution. Or education, it's critical to everybody in terms of whether it's on the K-12 side or the higher ed side. It's not as efficient and effective as it needs to be, and it needs to change. And on the government side, how do you make sure that governments are as efficient as possible delivering services to the people as in the best possible, lowest cost kind of way? And that these are these are big ideas, big sectors, if you will, that need to change and are going to change, and to the extent we could play some role in helping kind of accelerate that change, those are the businesses that we tend to gravitate towards.
We made a joke starting up about Genie, the online service run by GE that I ran before I joined AOL. The challenge there's a question on this, is that I was in a huge corporation trying to run a competitor to you, a nimble venture capital publicly traded company at the time, and the challenge I saw, as you and I have discussed, is intrapreneurship versus entrepreneurship, and how to be nimble in a large corporation and try and be aggressive and have a growth entity when the large corporation often is aimed at not providing that. Clearly, lots in this room would have to be entrepreneurs because they're working for a Fortune 1 entity, all the US government, stuff like that. What are some things you've seen in entrepreneurship versus entrepreneurship?
Well, it is tough, and anybody who's focused on that, I know many people here are, it's tough, and you want to innovate, you want to push things forward, and the system is sort of slows you down. It's like, we shouldn't do that, or that's too risky, or you just have to have the mentality saying, look, we got to keep pushing. This is, I know I'm right. I'm not doing a good job communicating this idea, obviously, because people aren't embracing it, but I got to stick with it and push the envelope and kind of figure out some way to be a pioneer that pushes to innovate more and push the people out of their comfort zone. That's what has to happen in any organization, but particularly true in larger organizations. I saw this as AOL grew. We started with a couple dozen people. The peak of AOL was about 10,000. We merged with Time Warner. It was about 90,000 people. So it really went from being pretty small to pretty big pretty quickly. And as it grew, it lost some of that, kind of entrepreneurial fervor, and almost shifted from, in the early days, I think entrepreneurs are kind of like attackers. They're kind of attacking the status quo. As they get to a certain scale, they become defenders. And most large organizations, most Fortune 500 organizations are defenders. They're actually trying to protect the downside. They want to get some of the upside, but they're actually more focused on making sure bad things don't happen as opposed to trying to unleash good things from happening. It's a different mindset, which is why so often you see these large sectors being disrupted by these attacking entrepreneurs that are more nimble and flexible and don't have anything to lose. They're not trying to protect an existing business or an existing way of doing things or existing organizational structure or existing people or have you. They're saying, look, this is a better way. Let's figure out a way to do it. The large organizations that figure out how to bring in some of that fervor, some of those people, and then support them and recognize there are going to be, sometimes there'll be failures, but that's has to happen if you're going to be pushing forward and innovate. We actually launched my wife Jean runs the Case Foundation. We launched an initiative a few months ago called Be Fearless. Because if you look at our Case Foundation site, there's a great video on it and so forth. But it doesn't just apply to nonprofits. I think it applies to business. It applies to people in their personal lives. People have to recognize that any great undertaking has risk, and there are always going to be naysayers. Even when I started with AOL, there were a lot of people, like including my parents, who thought it was stupid. For years. I think it took them a decade to figure out what I was doing. And finally said, okay, well, I guess it's okay. Because for a while they thought it's like, what is he doing? I mean, it's not, it's sort of, that just doesn't, and they did it not because they were, didn't want to be supportive. They loved me and just thought I was on a weird path. Eventually, eventually we kind of got some traction. So you just have to understand, I'm sure you do within your organization, it sometimes is kind of lonely because you feel like you're pushing and you're not really getting, a lot of support. But that's a critical thing to do in any organization. I would argue, as a nation, we need to make sure we don't slip into being a defender. We need to remain an attacker. And I don't mean this in any kind of military context. I mean it more in terms of thinking about the economy and things like that.
Well, you've been engaged at the national level with President Obama and other business leaders in Startup America, and
Right.
I was doing something with sort of DC, Maryland, Virginia at the state and district level. What are some features of that effort that you have found appealing, and is it possible to generate more startups in a nation as big and robust and complex an economy as we have here?
Yeah, I'd go back a little bit. The way I think about it is the United States was a startup 200 plus years ago. It was a startup. Bunch of crazy people got on boats and sailed over here thinking there's a better way. They could have a better life. They could create a new country with some kind of learning some of the lessons from where they came from, saying some of those we want to apply, others we want to change, and that's really what it was. We were a startup. And now we're the leading economy in the world. And now we're the leader of the free world, is what you hear. Well, how'd that happen? It didn't happen by accident. It was the work of entrepreneurs who created not just companies, but entire industries that then powered our economy and gave us now this kind of leading position in the world. And we can't lose sight of that. This is what got us here. And we need to double down on entrepreneurship to make sure we continue to be the leading innovator. Other countries around the world have figured this out, that the secret sauce that's powered the American economy is entrepreneurship. And they're moving very aggressively to change their policy around immigration to attract talent, to change their policies around taxes to attract investment, change their policies around research investment to try to get more ideas in labs in different countries, change the regulatory policies to make it easier to get started and scale businesses quite aggressively in many parts of the world, because they want to replicate that American formula around innovation and entrepreneurship. So I actually think it's critical. I mean, if your future of America has to be, in my opinion, driven by an innovative entrepreneurial culture, kind of pushing the envelope and saying there is a better way. And oh, by the way, when we sit here with 8% unemployment, which is too high, and a 2% economic growth rate, which is too low, if you want to fix those, you've got to double down on entrepreneurs. The Kauffman Foundation, which tracks this, says the last 3 decades, 40 million jobs have been created by young, high-growth companies. And they say it accounts for all the net job growth. It's not the small businesses, it's not the big businesses. They as aggregate, some grow, some decline, but as aggregate sectors, they haven't been big creators of jobs. The place that creates the jobs are the company like Living Social I mentioned that suddenly has thousands of people, or Facebook, or but it's not just technology. You see this across the board. One of the most successful restaurant companies in the last decade is Chipotle in Denver. That's worth $12 billion. It's a lot of burritos. Under Armour in Baltimore. Basically Kevin Plank started that, and I think he was kind of like a football player and thought the t-shirts he was wearing got too sweaty, and so he said, I think there's got to be a better way. Well, Under Armour is now a global brand worth $5 billion. Met the guy a month ago who founded Chobani Yogurt. 5 years ago, he bought a dead factory in upstate New York. Basically, like closed. Bought it, and now this year it'll do $1 billion of sales, and they'll be number 1 in the yogurt category. This is entrepreneurship, a better idea, somebody taking that risk and pushing forward. So I think it's great to see it through the prism of what we're doing at Revolution, investing in a handful of entrepreneurial companies that have this mindset. But beyond that, I think it's important to kind of focus on this nationally, both in terms of the Startup America effort, which is building up regional ecosystems. We actually think there's too much attention focused on Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. And I love Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley's awesome. Yeah. And a lot of great companies are started in Silicon Valley. But not all great companies are started in Silicon Valley. There is this rise of the rest and sort of this regional development of companies that's really important to watch. And then the last one is making sure folks here in Washington, work together in a bipartisan way to make sure we remain the world's most entrepreneurial nation. Like, it's really important. And there are a lot of issues to focus on. I was on a panel at this Washington Ideas Forum yesterday, and people were talking about this, talking about that. And my point was those are all important. I'm not saying any of them are unimportant. But I think the most important is making sure that we come together in a bipartisan way to make sure we remain the world's most entrepreneurial nation. We did something 6 months ago. The Congress passed something called the Jobs Act, jumpstarting our business startups, that legalized things like crowdfunding, created an on-ramp for IPOs that helped in terms of access to capital, which is a big deal for entrepreneurs. There's now a bipartisan bill called the Startup Act 2.0 that deals with high-skilled immigration and some regulatory issues and some commercialization issues. It's got to pass, and it's got to pass quickly if we're going to kind of win this next battle and remain the most entrepreneurial nation.
Let's talk about education. I know you've made some investments in it, and your personal commitment to it is clear for anyone who watches and follows your career. K through 12, what are some things that you're seeing in the domestic education market that you think technology and some startup and entrepreneurial behavior can affect?
Well, our view on education, more broadly, is that technology is and needs to be a critical enabler, a critical disruptor. At the same time, you have to be careful not to assume that everything that now exists somehow is going to go away. And there are some people who are basically saying, the next university is going to be this digital university in the cloud and have no campuses, and it's possible, and maybe there are certain sectors and certain people where that works. But the reality, I think, is that 10 years from now, 90%, probably more than 90% of people are going to be in physical spaces and classrooms. The question is how to enhance that experience. So both before, during, and after class, you can have a better learning experience. So I think the revolution in education, I think, will happen in an evolutionary way, trying to over time, you'll have a significant impact. But in the short run, it really is sort of moving the ball forward and sort of, kind of a lot of, kind of blocking and tackling kind of stuff to move things. And looking at through the prism, not so much of technology and what it can do, but more in the context of students, how can they learn better in a more personalized kind of way, and how is it a resource for teachers or hired for professors so they can do a better job of providing the overall context, the overall content, if you will, but also create some essentially more personalized paths so people can kind of extend their learning in ways that are more more personalized, which clearly technology can do. So I think it's going to be more of a hybrid. It's not going to be kind of a not going to be something we wake up and everybody's kind of online instead of being in classrooms. I think that is not going to happen. At the same time, it's also equally true that what we've done the last 100 years can't be what we do in the next 100 years. We've got to change how we do this so we can provide basically better learning outcomes more efficiently.
We spoke before about the efficiency of purchasing in the school environment, and we're happy, you and I touched on this in the private conversation, we're happy to recognize someone here today is Tracy Joshua. Tracy is the chief.
From Detroit.
That's right, Chief Procurement and Logistics Officer from Detroit. We've been working with Tracy at FedBid to make sure that the budgets that are shrinking in the public school system in Detroit, as they are in all major metropolitan areas, are used more efficiently. So Tracy is the first recipient of our Chief Trailblazer Award here at FedBid. Tracy is here. We'd like to recognize her and have her come up and get the award. Steve and I to get it. Tracy? Right here again. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you. It wouldn't be Washington, D.C. without a photo op, I guess. So
And I should say, I mentioned Tracy earlier. I was in Detroit a couple of months ago. And this actually it goes back to this issue of entrepreneurship and why it's so important. Two things I was struck by there. One was it was a reminder that 50 years ago, Detroit was Silicon Valley. It was the most robust, innovative, region in the country, maybe in the world, with the most robust economy, because entrepreneurs had identified, Henry Ford and others, this idea of the car and saying we can transform the world of giving people the ability to get from here to there more efficiently, and that really built Detroit, and it was a vibrant community and with great schools and great everything, and then for a variety of reasons it lost some of that innovation kind of DNA. Global competitors kind of started grabbing market share, and Detroit's lost 50% of its population in the last 50 years. So it went from being the icon of American entrepreneurship and innovation, the Silicon Valley of its time, to a kind of a city in freefall. And the reason was it kind of shifted from being an attacker, innovator, disruptor, to being more of a defender, more bureaucratic, and so forth. More complicated than that, but that's a simple way to look at it. Now the good news is Detroit is kind of fighting back, and there are many parts of the the industrial belt, if you will. I've been in Detroit, but Cleveland and Cincinnati and a lot of other places recently, and there is a kind of a they're fighting their way back. They're saying, we're going to make this happen. They are trying to figure out a way. The core strategy is to be more supportive of startups. They said that, we're not going to focus so much on trying to get big businesses to move here, which is traditionally what state governments have tried to do. If we can just get them to come over here, then we'll have a lot of jobs, and we'll create some incentives to get them. And there's always going to be some aspect of that. They're saying, no, we're going to figure out ways to create the context and the incentives to create the next Ford Motor Companies, or the next Microsofts, or the next what have you. How do we create that in our area so when they do grow, then we get the benefits of that growth?
Not to get into politics, but you've been here, I guess, 30 years now, and clearly the fiscal cliff and some of the challenges facing us budgetarily at the national level are looming large for everybody. What are some, with the access that your career has given you to the highest levels of the legislative process and to the White House, what are some things you're seeing and some themes or some magic wand moments you hope happen as we approach some of these challenges budgetarily?
Well, I'd say the one magic wand moment, probably not a moment, but more a context that I hope will happen, and everybody talks about it, but it doesn't really happen, but hopefully now it will, is bipartisanship. I mean, it really is an issue. I know some folks here work in different government agencies kind of see it firsthand. But we have some big problems as a nation, and we're not going to solve them if we're in silos and focused on our talking points and generally not talking with each other. But if we do talk with each other, talking past each other. This is an unfortunate dynamic. Now that maybe because the election is now over, people can now focus less on politics and more on policy. But I have, in the 30 years I've been here, I've seen it gotten more difficult in terms of the trust and the relationships and the ability to kind of find kind of common ground, even though the word compromise somehow became like a dirty word, which strikes me as that's been the core of our democracy for 200 years, and figuring out ways to come together on big issues, I think is important, and that's got to be the main thing. So there are some economic issues that need to get some resolution sooner rather than later. There are some innovation, entrepreneurship issues. There are a bunch of issues, and the question is, how do you kind of create the context and build the trust and relationships so people can find common ground? And this Jobs Act I mentioned 6 months ago, at least that was a sign that you could do this. The White House supported that legislation. Eric Cantor, the majority leader, supported that legislation, and it passed the House and the Senate with about 80% of folks. So it clearly was a broad bipartisan bill, and we just need more of those kind of common sense, common ground solutions to some of these big problems. But one of the reasons, frankly, we were interested in FedBid, we got involved 9 months ago, something like that. Was we loved the idea, the entrepreneur, the platform, disrupt, do better way, and take a long-term view, built to last, and so forth. But we also said that large organizations, certainly governments, but also large businesses and states and so forth, are going to have to be more efficient. And if there is a way that they can save money, this is going to be a good thing to help encourage and broaden, and also could be for us as investors a good business. But I think this year the number's better, but like $3 billion or so of stuff will go through the FedBid platform, and people save 12 to 15%. If that continues, I think 3 or 4 years from now, we'll be able to save the government $1 billion. Kind of like that. And we're also building a great business as part of that, but that's the kind of battle that needs to be fought. So exactly what the resolution of the deficit is, and what happens with a balanced approach and revenues and where the things get cut. I mean, that'll work itself through. But no matter what the result is, there is going to be an imperative that we as a nation be as efficient as we can be. And if you can kind of buy things more efficiently, I think that's a good thing. It also helps support, frankly, a lot of small businesses, because the nice thing also about the FedBid platform is the way you're linking buyers and sellers, and some of these buyers otherwise wouldn't have the ability to kind of compete, and now they do. So those are the kind of things that are important, and we obviously look at it through a prism of investment, but we also look at it through the prism of we want to back great ideas that can be platform companies that can change the world, and helping governments and large organizations save money and do things more efficiently is important.
The previous commercial brought to you by FedBid. Sorry, I know you didn't mean that way. Just to signal, we're going to stay on schedule here. We'll take some questions and answers. Questions to Steve from the audience. We have Mike here in the center row, and I'll just 1 second. A couple more to Steve, and then I'll open it up to the audience. So you've had, I would argue, one of the great, either on stage as a leader of it or a front row seat in the technology growth of the last 30 years. Unfair question, but a lot of us read, the Steve Jobs biography by Walter Isaacson and stuff. Who are some of the folks that you've seen over the last 30 years that you think of now as like, that man or woman, they did a great job. They were cool. They were a version of me in their arena, be it technology or others. Who are some of your heroes in the last 30 years in
Well, I think it's a mix, and I actually, Steve, I had great respect for Steve, and obviously what he did in terms of innovation and great products and creating a culture around innovation was terrific. I remember when he as everybody probably knows, got kind of kicked out of Apple, kind of for a bunch of years, almost a decade, just kind of, I wouldn't say a loss, but sort of trying to kind of find his way, I guess. Came back in Apple when it really was in crisis. Everybody had kind of given it up for dead, and he said, I believe in the brand, I believe in the people, I believe in the idea, and kind of built a great company. He had some maybe rough edges that the book, Walter Isaacson's book, kind of highlights. But overall, he was certainly a great innovator. Bill Gates, I competed against pretty vigorously, and we kind of had our battles over the years. I think again was able to scale a significant company. People now that are I think Jeff Bezos, that we built with Amazon, is quite extraordinary. How he took it from a relatively small idea around we'll sell you books online to kind of a global e-commerce company. I mentioned some of the other companies outside the technology world that I think also are great entrepreneurs. Fred Smith at FedEx, I think is one of the great entrepreneurs of the last half century. Again, took that idea, everybody thought it was crazy, and now it's a kind of huge global business. So I think there are a lot of great stories to look at. But the thing that's common with all those they weren't small ideas; they were big ideas, and they stuck with it. It was gonna be a 20, 30-year journey for Fred Smith. I think it's now coming up on 40 or 50-year journey. He's still at it. He's like there's still more to be done. And I think that taking that kind of entrepreneurial, innovative side and then figuring out how to scale these companies so they really are significant, sustainable companies that really have a significant, sustainable impact, to me are the ones that really are kind of are the ones to showcase.
So Meg Whitman, Carly Fiorina, two technology leaders that learned into politics. Any day we see Steve Case for president?
And they actually didn't go into politics. They tried to go into politics. And they're both terrific and actually did be in politics. And I actually do think it'd be great if more people from the business community went into politics. I personally am not going to, because I believe what I'm doing mostly focused on working with entrepreneurs on these big ideas, and then kind of moonlighting on some of these other things around, kind of policy and so forth is the best way I can make a contribution. And anybody's willing to do it, I applaud them. It's just not. I don't think I've got the right, probably patience to do that.
Well, let's open it up. Any questions from the audience? If you wouldn't mind going to the microphone here so we can chronicle your question. Oh, we have a roving mic. Oh, there we are. Yes.
Good morning, thank you. I'm Hilary Fordwich. I host Government Contracting Weekly on CBS right after the McLaughlin Group. I have a two-part question for you, Mr. Case. An executive was coming on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he was lamenting the status of entrepreneurship in the country. And he said to me, he said, Hilary, name any invention in the last 4 years, any creativity in the last 4 years. The last 4 years, all entrepreneurship has been stifled. Name something. Can you think of something? And I said, well, no, but that may be me. So the first part of my question is, has there been anything great invented in the last 4 years? And is that a product, yes or no, of the current administration and legislation? And the second part of the question is, if the answer to the first part is yes, the second question is, do you have influence, and do you think you'll be able to influence the administration to encourage entrepreneurship and to change things so we can have more of that again?
Yeah, well, I would, the data suggests, not just the last 4 years, but even beyond, that startups are down. The startups are down 23% versus 5 years ago. It's gotten harder to start a company and harder to scale a company. So that is the data. There have been a lot of innovative things that have happened in the last few years, and some of them are around some of the technology businesses. What's happening in the whole local and mobile space is phenomenal. Some of the things there are, it's really phenomenal. There's a whole new industry emerging, kind of 3D printers and sort of different forms of manufacturing that actually are really quite encouraging, and there continue to be a lot of innovative things happening in the healthcare industry and education industry. So I actually think there are a lot of great entrepreneurs, a lot of great ideas. We just need to make sure we create the right context to make sure that they really have the opportunity to flourish. But I actually give the President some credit for some of the things that have happened. He, 2 years ago, created something called the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, asked me to co-chair it. A year and a half ago, helped launch the Startup America effort at the White House and push some agencies of government to also embrace some policies, the Patent Office and immigration and other things that were more supportive of entrepreneurs, and did champion the Jobs Act I mentioned with crowdfunding. Now again, these things can only happen with bipartisan support. So anytime I say anything positive about the president, I also say something equally positive. In this case, with Eric Cantor's leadership, is really what got that through the House, and without both of them working together, it wouldn't have happened. So I think there's a reason to be optimistic that we are, as we sit here, still the most entrepreneurial nation, but we need to be careful not to get complacent, which is why trying to pass the Startup Act 2.0 becomes so important. So it's one of these systems: the glass half full, glass half empty. I'd say the glass is half full, but we need to kind of make sure we focus on this and do it in a bipartisan way.
Any other questions or comments for Steve this morning? Yes.
When you're looking at some of these built-to-last companies or potential built-to-last companies, how important is a potential network effect for the marketplace that they're going into, where there's going to be just one winner at the end of the day because of buyers and sellers coming to one place?
I think it's very important. And that's a testament to marketplaces, as you said, that there are benefits to everybody that create more scale, and essentially, and it's true with AOL in the early days, that we always believed the killer app was community, people talking to each other. It was chat rooms, it was messages, it was bulletin board. Now people talk about it in the context of social media, Facebook and Twitter, social media. We talked about it as community. We always believed that was the killer app. When we first launched, there was nobody to talk to. It was like, you go online and there'd be one other person online. Not that interesting. The network effect you're talking about, you added more people, and added more people, and added more people, so there were other people that you could talk to, and became much more interesting as a tool, and created that kind of network effect. That's why we interconnected AOL with the internet. It's sort of silly to say this, but not silly, but striking, I should say. When we started in 1985, it actually was illegal for us to connect to the internet. As some of you know, it was until 1991 only for government agencies and educational institutions. It was no commercial use of the internet permitted. So we actually, for the first half a decade, were building things kind of on the side. It was only in 1991 it became legal that's when the network effect really agreed. So those businesses are really hard to get started and to get to scale. But once they break through, the momentum, the increasing returns, the network effect becomes quite significant. Again, I think personally, that was one of the attractiveness of FedBid. It started a decade ago, did the heavy lifting to build the core platform, get the marketplace working, and we felt that with our help, maybe it could just grow a little faster, reach some other markets faster than it might have on its own. But those marketplace businesses where there is a network effect are great businesses.
And we think about all the government investment to make it. You think about the government dollars really drove so much of what the platform is all about today.
Yeah, and I think this is where the government got it right. 50 years ago, they basically, particularly through DARPA, made the investment in basic research to kind of get it going. Had some specific defense-related objectives, but basically got it going. Then once they did decide to commercialize it, basically had essentially a hands-off attitude, saying, okay, we're going to open this up and let the marketplace do its thing. And that really allowed a lot of things to flourish. At the same time, they essentially broke up the phone company, AT&T, which created enormous competition around communications companies. Instead of being one, to suddenly there were hundreds of communications companies, so communications costs went down. They actually had it basically kind of got it right in terms of kind of birthing and then unleashing a whole new industry, and that is why for the last 25 years it's starting to shift, but the internet has really been dominated by U.S. companies. The Googles and the Facebooks and so forth have been here. They're starting to see now there are far more internet users obviously outside the United States than inside the United States, because just the nature of having 7 billion people out there. And as a result, there are some very large, successful companies in other countries. But it really was an industry that the United States led on, because it got it right in terms of identifying it as an opportunity, doing the research, enable it to get started, and then letting the marketplace kind of, and entrepreneurship kind of work.
A couple more questions for Steve.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for recognizing Detroit and Detroit Public Schools. Great things are happening in Detroit, and I'm excited to be a part of it, particularly at Detroit Public Schools. Without Mr. Roy Roberts, we would not be able to pioneer and be transformational. So I thank you again for the recognition.
Thanks.
My question today is, I was happy to hear you say that technology is an enabler in education, because I get kind of concerned about all these digital platforms. But I do have a question as it relates to security and bringing your own device. So bringing your own device to the classroom or even in business, and then how we handle that with security and making sure the data is secure.
No, it's a challenge, and then big organizations have had this challenge for decades. I remember when the PC first emerged, Apple and IBM, others, 30 years ago, I guess. There was a lot of resistance from IT departments. They said, this is something that's going to kind of outside of our control. We kind of like the system we have in place. It's more integrated, kind of end-to-end system. These newfangled things are, and for many years they were banned. You couldn't bring your computer. You couldn't connect it into the system. After a while, they realized, I think correctly, that was a losing battle. That people were going to, start using these devices, and indeed, it made sense then to sort of try to create some degree of standardization, make it easier for people to use it, and try to get people as much as you can to kind of all do one thing, use one thing, as opposed to have to support 1,000 different things. So it led to some phase of standardization. But as devices proliferate, and they are proliferating and will continue to proliferate because of mobile networks and different devices and phones and tablets and so forth, and with a lot of different competitors, a lot of different standards, a strategy has to be, I think, one that is more of a network inclusive strategy, and figure out what are the key things that you're concerned about in terms of data, and figuring out how to protect those without kind of trying to slow, which is a losing battle, kind of these new devices being used by people. And I think they actually, with some risk, and I'd say probably with some on education, it's even greater risk on things like healthcare and others, given some of the privacy issues. On balance, the benefits of these devices are going to far outweigh the risk. Those are really the tools to allow for more customized education. They are the tools to allow for more personalized health and monitoring and recommendations and tracking and things like that. So sort of looking at on balancing, how do we embrace it because it really is going to allow us to do what we're trying to do more effectively. But at the same time, there are, look at what are the legitimate concerns and how do you try to address those, but not have the bias too much in trying to protect bad things from happening and not recognize that the big opportunity is to enable good things to happen. And thank you for what you're doing in Detroit. It's great.
Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Case. Al Boykin from the National Contract Management Association. A few years ago, I had a chance to help develop a policy for use of reverse auctions and acquisition in the Air Force. And I think we had some great success there, but my real question here is, as we look at this environment right now for, government industry side, we're trying to develop ways to become more efficient in the way that we go through our acquisitions. So the real question is, how can we align the thinking of both industry and government to help us to evolve the best way to take advantage of some of the transformational things that you talk about here in the systems-oriented environment?
Well, I think Mark, I would probably have more insight because they do it every day. My take is it requires a mentality that embraces more diversity. I'm not talking about diversity in class content, but diversity of people that are part of your network. I think it's the easy path is to continue to work with the people you've worked with that have generally done a pretty good job. You generally kind of know them and trust them and that's sort of been good enough. The reality, and I think from the Detroit example is a good one, that there are, when you open it up and there is more competition, you will be able to get, competition works, and you will be able to get better products at lower prices if you have more people in the game competing for that business. To do that on your own, I think is tough. To do it in an organized way through a platform, like obviously I was interested in FedBid, really creates the opportunity to capitalize on that. But the other big challenge, not just on procurement, but for large organizations generally, is how do you make sure you have a more nimble and almost porous organization that connects to the rest of the world? You have your tentacles out and are trying to figure out what other people are doing. And no matter how great you are, far more of the smart people in the world work other places. They're not working for you. So how do you tap into some of those other smart people in other places? It's more of a network. It's not the model that, kind of, even when I was coming out of school 50 years ago with, kind of more of a top-down kind of corporate environment where people tended to it was kind of all pretty contained. I think with a lesson really across the board, it certainly applies to procurement, but also applies to innovation generally, is how do you have a more connected model, more of a network model, reach out and create different ways to innovate, different ways to do business that really benefits from everybody out there, as opposed to just the people who happen to be kind of sitting in your and even some of the great innovative companies the last decade, Google being an example, they have hired a lot of really smart people. That's their strategy has been like hire really smart people, and they've been successful in hiring a lot of really smart people. But they'd be the first to say there are far more smart people that aren't at Google. So how do we, when we launch some platform, Android or something, how do we unleash all of that instead of trying to kind of almost contain it and try to overly manage it? So it's a little bit out, the management in the future, innovation in the future is going to be kind of giving up what you thought was necessary in the past, which is more of a almost like a control mentality, and instead unleashing much more of a networked, open a model that will result in you getting better ideas, that will result in getting people working with you, even if they don't work for you, but they can work with you. And it certainly, like we're seeing with FedBid, does help also in terms of making sure you're able to fulfill your mission by, I think we're talking about Detroit, that ultimately it's about the kids and the learning. Well, if you can buy stuff more efficiently, you can put more money into teachers or more money into kind of redesigning a classroom, whatever you need to do. If you save a little money here, you can apply it to the core mission over there. And having that mentality, I think, is great. But it does require kind of letting go, and does require saying, well, look, we got to be a little more nimble, a little more flexible. Government actually is doing some interesting things around open data with that whole idea. Todd Park, who's this, the U.S. CTO, is sort of how do you unleash more data and let kind of people run with it. Government's not going to be able to figure it all out, but if you put the data in the hands of a bunch of engineers, a bunch of entrepreneurs, a bunch of good things are going to happen. And so unleashing others to innovate, and unleashing others to help you be more efficient, unleashing others to help you learn about new trends and not just wait for your people to report on them, I think is the model of the future, and particularly important for larger organizations.
I like that, force organization. I'm going to use that. 2 more questions, and then we'll let Steve go.
I'm Jason Magson. I work at FedBid. You mentioned that a lot of the jobs were created in these entrepreneurial companies versus the large or the very small. What advice would you have based on your experience about what people in companies like FedBid should be doing in order to grow to Living Social and really expand, create jobs, and be successful and meet the needs of the customers?
It's a great question. I think scaling companies, as I said, so the AOL experience, is hard. And so ultimately, it is about people. I think any organization is about people. The issues we talked about earlier around difficulty around getting things done in Washington is mostly about people and relationships and trust and so forth. So you got to get the people right. You got to have a team that really believes in the mission and understands and is clear about the priorities and is passionate about pursuing that mission and perseveres. So really kind of take the long-term view, because there are always going to be setbacks. There are always going to be problems. This kind of goes with the territory of anything you try to do. The question is, how do you deal with those things and then learn from those things and then kind of push forward and kind of take the fight the next battle. But it starts with the long-term, built-to-last mentality. We're in this for the long run. It starts with really believing that you're on a mission that's an important mission that's going to make the world a better place, and then assembling a team and then having the right kind of balance between long-term vision and short-term execution. One of my favorite quotes from one of America's great entrepreneurs and inventors is Thomas Edison. It was, "Vision without execution is hallucination." And I think it says a lot. It says, you need the vision, you need the big idea, you need something, to be passionate about. It's like a battle worth fighting. It's a journey worth pursuing. But if that's all you have, and you don't focus every day on what it takes to get the job done that day and this week and this month and this quarter and this year, and execute, then you don't succeed. And you've got to have both to create great companies and to create great organizations. So it's always a balancing act. You got to make sure people are inspired and understand the big idea and understand why it's an important idea and why they should make sacrifices to pursue that idea and so forth. The vision thing, if you will. You got to couple that with execution and dedication and discipline and operations and kind of a grinding it out kind of aspect of things. It's true in organizations, also true in sports. How there's a lot of examples of great athletes being assembled that don't win, even though they should. And the reason they don't win is they're not playing well as a team. There are also great examples of people that lose because they're always on offense and not enough on defense. Or when they're on offense, using football example, they either put the ball in the air too much and get intercepted, or they put the ball in the air too little and have this ground game where they're just grinding out a yard or two, but never actually put enough yards in the field to score touchdowns. It's about balance. You got to have offense and defense, and even your offense, you got to sometimes be grinding it out and sometimes kind of put the ball in the air. So you got to get the right balance. It starts with a big idea that you can be passionate about and rally a great team around, and take a long-term view.
One last question from the audience.
Good morning, Steve. I'm Alan Young. I work with SAIC supporting the Office of Secretary of Defense. My question today is, what do you do personally to clear the path to innovation? There's a lot of distractions out there. There's a lot of information that we have that we didn't have before with the internet. So what do you do personally that you could relate to us, like what your day is like so that you can get rid of the distractions and make sure that the things you believe in today are coming to reality?
Well, it goes back to exactly the last question. It is a mix, and sometimes you've got to focus on the things you got to get done, and sometimes you have to focus on exposing yourself to other ideas. And actually, one man's distraction might be another man's inspiration. So I think being distracted is not always bad. Being on alert for new ideas and new people and things, I think is healthy. But again, if you're only focused on that, you're not getting the job done. So I do spend a lot of time traveling around and meeting a lot of people. I do spend a lot of time reading a lot of different things, magazine websites and what have you, trying to get a sense of what's next. And kind of like Wayne Gretzky was a great hockey player, not because he focused on where the puck was, but where the puck was going, and having that sense. And you got to be out and about and learning and listening. And the nice thing is, through the internet, you can do some of that from your desk. You don't have to be physically other places, but I do end up traveling a fair amount. And the second is empowering a team. The team we have at Revolution is pretty nimble and pretty flexible and pretty empowered. It's not like they're not waiting for me. They kind of have the ability to kind of move the ball forward. So I'm not becoming a bottleneck there. So some of it's focusing on the kind of the big picture. Some of it is trying to be exposed to kind of ideas on the periphery, because the things, as I said before, the things that were crazy 30 years ago, like the internet, now are taken for granted and part of everyday life. I think every great disruptive idea starts off being crazy and stupid and rejected by most people. So part of it is just kind of leaning into the future a little bit and having your antenna up so you kind of can see things and kind of, it's almost like a pattern recognition thing. You see some things trend, but then empower your organization, your team, so they really can execute and make sure there is the right balance between vision and execution. People know what they need to do, and then are empowered and able to do that and be supportive when you need to be, but get out of the way, most of the time.
I get the last at bat. You and your lovely bride who started the Case Foundation. What are some of the things from the social value and the not-for-profit arena that the Case Foundation is engaged in that you're most proud of?
Well, interestingly, at least to us, the mission of the Case Foundation is the same as the mission of Revolution. We invest in people and ideas that can change the world. Sometimes we think we can best do that through the prism of investing, or sometimes even starting, nonprofit efforts. Sometimes we think it's best done through the prism of investing in businesses. But we want to kind of have all the tools available to us in terms of pursuing things. We've started the foundation about 15 years ago. We've done a number of different things, some that we're particularly proud of. We spent a lot of time now on this entrepreneurship issue, including Startup America. We're partnering with the Kauffman Foundation on that. We launched, as I mentioned, this Be Fearless campaign. But a lot of it is about driving more collaboration and leveraging the internet as a way to create almost a democratization of philanthropy. So we invest in a bunch of things like Network for Good and causes and Mission Fish and so forth. Put a few $1 million into these initiatives. They've raised over $1 billion for a whole slew of nonprofit efforts. So it gives you the leverage and sort of what we're talking about with the network model and sort of the increasing returns kind of dynamic. And we're also very focused on trying to encourage more cross-pollination and learning from each other. We joined this effort with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and others called the Giving Pledge. And the main reason we did it was actually to create a platform for philanthropists to meet and talk about things, and mostly talk about failures as opposed to talk about successes, because that would result in everybody then being smarter in what they were doing, philanthropic, whether you focus on healthcare, education, what have you. There are things you can learn from each other. So driving more collaboration, which helps drive more innovation, has been really important to that. And one area we're focused on now, which is sort of the bridging of these two worlds, is the impact investing space, which is more of a hybrid between kind of a partly business, partly kind of social, kind of mission-driven. I think that's pretty important. But our focus is more like a little bit like Revolution, how we focus on something for a while, really try to get something moving and create some momentum, and then kind of hand off the baton so it kind of lives on, and then we focus on the next thing, as opposed to some foundations which are terrific, that say for the next 50 years we're going to just focus on cancer research or something. We have we're focused on innovation and collaboration and across a whole variety of sectors.
Well, I think I speak for most people in just from a meta perspective, just saying thank you for starting AOL and changing the world. You really did. And it's something that we enjoy every single day, both in our personal and professional lives. And here at FedBid, we're glad you're an investor. So please join me in thanking Steve Case.
Thank you all for being here.